I just want to start off with a short story because there was a running joke. When I met Jim 8 years ago, we're both facilitating for a national client. Jim's plane would be heading to one city to teach, while my plane would literally be flying across the country to another city. And on the rare occasions where we'd be able to meet up in the same city and grab a meal, we'd always have these creative discussions around organizational culture, project management, and what our own visions were for the future of this industry and for how we all work together. And I remember a few times saying to Jim, we really need to collaborate on something, right, Jim? Like, I don't know if you remember, like how many times I was like, Jim, we got to do something. And then COVID hit, and we were finally able to stay put in one place long enough to make something happen. So cut to about 1 year ago. And Jim, do you want to take it from here?
Yeah, thanks, Rose. And again, welcome everybody for being here today. And it was almost exactly a year ago. Rose and I were on Zoom, and we were lamenting that the status quo of how organizations behave, it's really incomplete. And projects seem to be these painful, these futile exercises. Often you don't get the outcomes that you were hoping for, and there's got to be a better way. And I think it's important to say here that it's not that what's out there is necessarily bad. It's that we think that it's incomplete. It's not a full system for contributing our best. And as we go through the 5 elements here, our description of what's in here and the nature of the course, you need to think of this as in addition to what you've already been taught, rather than instead of what you've been taught. So think of it that way. So we sat down, Rose and I, and we put together what we think of as kind of a more complete landscape of what to focus on so that we can contribute our best, that we can work well together and manage the realities of delivering value in our work. What we've put together is an online asynchronous course. It's about 2.5 hours of video and additional work outside, really to provide you that landscape of things to consider. There's plenty of meat or tofu, depending on your dietary interests, that are in this workshop. And it's backed by decades of the work that Rose and I have done working with organizations, working with individuals, to really go deeper into this broader understanding of everything that we need to think about. And it's really, from my perspective anyways, it's great to see that it aligns really well with what you may be starting to see as a dramatic shift in different organizations. The Project Management Institute, with their latest version of their body of knowledge, has really shifted to a values-based approach and more about leadership, which is falling right into our wheelhouse, which is great. And Harvard Business Review 20 years ago, it was all about balanced scorecard this and SWOT analysis that. And if you pick up an HBR today, it's all about teams and relationships and psychological safety. And Google 10 years ago believes that they discovered with their Aristotle project what good teams are really all about. And it's really the stuff that we're talking about here. So this is really our expression of a wave that we're currently on. I think it's a wave that is going to be generational in its evolution to becoming really the mainstream of how we look at things. And it's as dramatic a shift for knowledge work as the Industrial Revolution was a dramatic shift for physical labor 120 years ago. The shift's happening. It's great to see that. If you've probably been exposed to Brene Brown or Dan Pink or Gretchen Rubin, Simon Sinek, all of these people, we are expressing and hopefully giving you some advice on how to leverage what is this new wave that's happening. Rose?
Thanks, Jim. Agreed. And we also, on this side here, we were looking at the WEF labor report published late last year. I'm sure you've seen probably even news articles around what employees are really needing in the shifting workplace as well. So at the end of this event, we're actually going to publish a couple of articles for you to take away as well. But what we want to do right now is we want to take you through what we've come to call the 5 elements, which are really considerations that we hope will help all of us thrive during these next few chapters of change. So let's get right at it. We're going to take you through a very brief intro of each of these elements. So Jim is going to take us through the first 2.5, and then I will take us through the last 2.5.
All right. Thanks, Rose. Now, as we put these together, there is an actual order to these. And the first element it all starts with you. So there's so much that we can do personally to learn from our experiences in the past, to clarify how our experiences have molded us into who we are today, and to take the time to really identify what we really want to achieve in our lives. We can work to improve ourselves, our skills, our attitudes. We can learn to understand better what our own values are. And that's really important, because if you aren't really aligned with what your own values are, how can you possibly determine whether or not they're aligned with the organization you work with? And we can work to really get crisp and clear on our intent for what we want to achieve in life, literally the legacy that we want to leave behind us. We can essentially build an effective resilience toolkit, if you will, a collection of skills, behaviors, perspectives that enables us to weather those storms that will come, that we will experience. And the good thing about that is that with this resilience toolkit that we build, we can actually be more powerful and gain greater joy in the good times as well. So there is a lot of work. It's challenging work that we need to do. And for many people, it can be, there's a resistance to really dive in and to pay attention to what's going on. So we work to break through that. It's absolutely essential work. And I would argue that of all the projects that you're involved in your life, probably the most important project that you'll ever tackle is the project of you. And technically, I'd have to say that it's really a program, because it's not something that really ends. It's something that you're going to be carrying throughout your entire life. And there's a lot of work that we can do. We lay out a lot of the ideas that you can riff on, that you can capture, that you can grow and build. And that's really the first element in a nutshell. The second element, from there, with that second element, we learn about how to be an effective team player, how to play well in the sandbox, if you will, and to understand that diversity, which is a huge topic these days, diversity really works best when we learn to become truly inclusive when we engage with others. Diversity is just a measure. I'm different from you in this way or that way. True inclusion is learning to be able to appreciate that the differences that we carry into the room with one another, we can actually leverage them as a group. And that becomes really a team superpower, if you will, that is really essential to be effective in teams. We look at how we can be intentional in designing a culture within our group, the people that we work with, where we can all bring out our best, where there's psychological safety, confidence for anybody to be able to speak up and say, this is the way I see things, let's talk about this, and that everyone in the group has a true voice. There's no need to wear a mask, if you will, in the workplace. And I really truly believe that anytime you feel that you need to put part of you aside at the door when you enter the workplace, you're essentially diminished. And if you're in that situation, how can you possibly give your all to the workplace? So there's a lot of really important elements that we play with here. And we also, in this second element, we look at a couple of forms of leadership as well. The first one, the fact that we are all leadership, we are all leaders, if you will, when we work to try and influence others. So there's that capacity that we all need to learn to carry and be more effective at. And that one of the most critical tasks for what I would call hierarchical leaders, bosses, if you will, in a lot of organizations, is to make sure that there is the space available for this intentional culture building to take place. It requires significant self-awareness and self-confidence on behalf of the leader. Not everybody's really up to that, but it's an absolutely essential concern that we need to work through. Overall, in the second element, we learn that we can be a heck of a lot more productive and intentional about designing the culture that we work in. It's an investment, it's not a cost, and it's really the lubrication that allows the machine of the organization to work together more efficiently. Okay, so that's the second element. Then in the third element, we transition to, after we've got our own act together and we know how to play well in the sandbox, we talk about the way we work together to get things done. And in most organizations, that's generally around the form of what we would call projects. And many people, many organizations would talk about projects as being on time and on budget. And I think that those are two things that we need to really drop down a level, because those are easy measures, not what I think are the most important measures to be concerned about. Really, we should be concerned about delivery of value as the essential driver for success on projects. How do we intend to make the consumer of our work, to make their life better, to help us make decisions with this understanding of the value that we want to deliver? It'll help us make decisions whether we go this way or that way on the project, so that we can understand the importance of sometimes what we might feel as mundane tasks on the project. They contribute to a greater whole. And if we've got a good, crisp understanding of the value we're delivering, we can actually sell that value to people so we can get support we need on our projects. Rose, you've got a couple of other ideas about this notion of value as well.
Oh, I've got a big soapbox when it comes to value. Some of you have probably heard me talk on this a few times before. I'm curious, has anybody ever here read the book, The Speed of Trust, Stephen Covey? Anybody read that book yet? Highly recommend. And in it, they introduce the research around something that we call the 3 times multiplier effect. And I'm not sure if you knew, but high trust teams outperform low trust teams by a factor of 3 to 1. So I've got a question for all of you. Have any of you ever lived this? You've been on a project, it's come in on time and on budget, which is a traditional definition of success. But along the way, either team relationships were eroded so much so that you may have lost some team members, or people have actually eroded those relationships. They might have stayed as part of the organization, but in the next set of projects, that erosion bled into those next set of projects. Have you ever experienced that? Just a bit of a hands up. I want to see if anybody ever had that happen. You've lost somebody on a team. Yeah, thank you. So what I want to ask is, how is that really success? Today, we recommend identifying 2 types of value opportunities that I actually use when I'm planning and implementing. I ask this question throughout the life cycle of a project. I never used to, but now I do. And I really want to share this consideration. The first one is what we call the easy to measure, the tangible value opportunities, AKA direct value opportunities. So let's say our workshop, right? It's a new product. We've invested time and money. Obviously, it's part of a business plan. We've got to measure some things like how many seats were sold, what the metadata is around engagement. Obviously, we've got to generate some revenue. We can feed our families and pay staff, but these are things that we can measure. These are easy, specific objectives that have quantitative, measurable results. Now, some of you in this room are true leaders. Actually, there's a couple of you that I've learned so much from. And so I've got to share some gratitude here, because one thing some of you even taught me here is that multiplier effect. How do we bring that into our projects and in our life? So when it comes to the indirect value opportunities, no longer is it the time where we just assume they're going to happen. Today, it helps us to plan more around those indirect value opportunities because they will actually multiply your direct value results. The questions that I'll ask are things like, how is my experience of work? Does it feel like work or does it feel like contribution? Would Jim and Winnie ever want to work with me again? Can we use processes that we've created here in other projects? Can we depend on each other? Do we hold each other accountable in a respectful way? So when somebody takes any of our workshops, how are we generating real world benefit for their life? These are examples of IVOs, indirect value opportunities that I know we need to identify and plan for early and often. So here's the question that I promised I'd give you. It's a question that I use every day, every time I start to plan through an implementation. What direct and indirect value opportunities specifically are we wanting to create? Why, for whom, and at what cost? So with that in mind, so those are the two value opportunities that our program does take you through in more detail. But what I want to get to next is it leads us to something that some of us certified PMs in the room already have probably read. If you picked up the latest PMBOK, the Project Management Body of Knowledge, number 7, as Jim noted, there's been quite a shift. And one of the things they speak to is called tailoring, something I've been soapboxing about for years. It's like one Gantt chart does not fit all sizes of projects. So let me just share a tiny story. One of my students told me a story of a young man who grew up and learned how to make homemade bread from his mother. Now, eventually he started to make the same bread for his family. And it was always shaped into very small loaves. One day his child asked him, "Dad, why are your loaves of bread so small?" And he answered, "Well, that's how I learned to make it." And then the child asked the most important question, which is, why? The dad thought about it, looked around his kitchen, looked at the modern oven, and realized in that moment that the reason his bread loaves were so small was simply because his mother's oven was small as well. Now, I'm sure you've heard variations of this story, but it really speaks to the fact that gone are the days of thinking that our projects are an easy bake predictive oven. Do you remember those easy bake ovens? We used to love them, right? We throw in our inputs, apply the processes, out come our deliverables and more outputs, and gone are the days of one Gantt chart fits all. And I'm not just talking about tools. Our approaches to how we estimate, how we implement, how we communicate, especially with the non-project managers, our multidisciplinary teams, how we design collaboration processes, how are we building our capacity for what used to be called soft skills, which are actually power skills in today's world. So my biggest tip here when it comes to tailoring is set aside time every time you connect with your group, and just set even like a minute aside and ask the how questions and the why questions. You will start then to work towards something that we call discovery. So as we've taken you through these first 4 bullets, the final one is really a practice of something that I call discovery. So curious pop quiz, what's the one thing that you can expect to happen on any plan? In the chat window. What's the one thing that you can expect to happen on any plan? Anybody? Hashtag yes, delays, disruption. There we go, Rachel, hashtag change, right? Change is a constant. And so when it comes to discovery, developing a practice of discovery and tailoring can really help you tap into the power of communication, but most importantly, creative thinking and adaptability. See, some of you also know I am also a creative professional, the world that I do there with regards to things like music. Well, what I've learned is that the world that we all interface with together, in whether it be organizational or any other type of world, it's a blend of critical and creative thinking. And so discovery taps into our ability to create solutions to what might be considered puzzles or problems. The way I see discovery is really 3 ways. I see it as a mindset that I can start at the top of my day with. I see it as a process. Can't help it. That's how I'm made. But I also see it as a practice. So when it comes to mindset or process, let me give you an example. When I have a client call me up, ask me to take on a project, I design a set of discovery questions. This just helps us use our time effectively, clarifies quickly what they think they need, which usually changes, and also what expectations that they may have, and helps me assess if I can meaningfully contribute. Some of you may have heard me teach the assess before yes protocol. That's just a discovery process. Now, discovery as a practice can help us tap into that creative solution power that I was speaking. And it also helps us activate our communication skills. Some of the most effective leaders and professionals I've had the pleasure of knowing have really learned how to listen for what's not being said. They have the courage to ask those difficult questions that help discover those assumptions early and often before those assumptions turn into damaging results. And they're cool with asking what I call the DOQs, dumb, obvious questions. So building your own practice of discovery can mean intentionally designing question sets that can help you prepare for change, assess risk, set expectations, but more powerfully, it'll help maintain what I call the beginner's mindset, that open-minded, curious state that allows us to uncover, innovate, create, and get to those solutions. One thing we do know for sure is a lack of discovery practice contributes to things like communication failures, which, as many of you know, is a root cause of project and organizational and relationship failure. So we've talked a lot, speaking of communication, and now we're going to hop into a really quick 5-minute chat with your own breakout group. Before we continue, though, I want to share a proven technique for reducing your own internal communication barriers. Are you ready to do this exercise with me? Super simple. It's a deep breath. All I want us to do is take one deep breath together. Just take a huge deep breath in and hold it, and now let it out. One more deep breath in, please. And hold it and let that out. If you would like the data around that, I'm happy to share that data. But the bottom line is that when you take that one breath, in fact, we've forgotten to breathe a lot. The bottom line is that it helps you think, listen, and speak better.